Have you been feeling tired lately? Not because you're working too much, but because your mind never seems to get a break. Maybe there's a problem at work, a difficult relationship, worries about money, or simply the uncertainty of what the future might bring. You keep thinking about it, hoping that if you worry enough or plan enough, you'll finally find an answer and feel better. But instead of feeling calmer, you often end up feeling even more exhausted, because the problem stays the same while your energy slowly disappears. Most people believe that peace comes after they fix everything that's wrong in their lives. They tell themselves that once this situation improves, once that problem is solved, then they'll finally be able to relax. But what if they've been chasing peace in the wrong place all along? More than 2,000 years ago, the Stoics discovered a simple idea that helped them remain calm during war, loss, uncertainty, and hardship. In this audiobook, you'll discover why that idea is still changing lives today and how it can help you deal with stress and everyday challenges in a completely different way. Stay until the end, because one shift in perspective could be far more powerful than you expect. And before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new audiobooks. And now, let's begin.
Stoicism, a guide to a happy and conscious life. Over 2,000 years ago, a merchant lost everything in a shipwreck and wandered into an Athenian bookshop. What he discovered there would shape the course of his life and ours, leading to the philosophy we know today as Stoicism. It's a philosophy so practical that it's been embraced by everyone from emperors to the enslaved, and so enduring that it influences modern therapy, coaching, and even the habits of the most composed individuals we know. Consider what follows a toolkit more than a history lesson. In these pages, you'll discover how to see clearly when emotions cloud your judgment, how to focus on what's in your control, and how to build an inner steadiness that no external crisis can shake. The door is open. Step inside. The philosophy of Stoicism. The main provisions. Stoicism is not merely an ancient school of thought. It is a practical guide to living with resilience, wisdom, and moral clarity. At its core lies the conviction that while we cannot control external events, we retain absolute authority over our judgments, desires, and responses. Virtue, defined as living in harmony with reason and nature, stands as the sole true good. Everything else, wealth, health, reputation, is regarded as indifferent, valuable only insofar as it serves virtuous action. This philosophy teaches emotional mastery not through suppression, but through rational discernment, distinguishing what depends on us from what does not. By cultivating self-discipline, justice, courage, and wisdom, the Stoic aims to achieve apatheia, freedom from destructive passions, and to navigate life's turbulence with unwavering inner stability. These principles, forged in antiquity, continue to offer a timeless framework for ethical living and psychological resilience. Stoic philosophy is built on several interlocking principles, but the most central is the dichotomy of control. Some things depend on us, our judgments, our efforts, and our character. Others, like other people's opinions or the weather, do not. The Stoics believe that confusion between the two is at the root of most suffering. Redirecting our energy toward what we can control, they argued, allows much of our anxiety to dissolve. Related to this is the idea of living in accordance with nature. But for the Stoics, nature wasn't about hiking barefoot through forests. It was about exercising our uniquely human capacity for reason. We can pause between an impulse and our response, assess the situation, and choose how to act. It is in that pause that Stoicism resides. Finally, the tradition organized the good life around four cardinal virtues: wisdom, seeing situations clearly; courage, doing what is right even when it costs you; Justice, treating others fairly. Temperance, knowing when enough is enough. The Stoics treated these as daily tools, not distant ideals, a checklist you could run any difficult moment through to find a course of action worth taking. Despite their vastly different lives, the Stoic philosophers had one thing in common. They believed that how we respond to events is far more important than what happens to us. Epictetus, born a slave and crippled by his owner, taught with a rawness and humour that still resonates today. Seneca, one of Rome's wealthiest men, wielded his influence as a political advisor to Emperor Nero, writing with fiery intensity about the fragility of life. And Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor at the height of his power, filled his private journal with self-reflection, gratitude, and daily reminders that his control over external events was an illusion. What connects them across centuries and vastly different circumstances is a single conviction. Your life is shaped less by what happens to you than by the way you choose to respond. Stoic ideas never really disappeared. They filtered into early Christian ethics, surfaced in Enlightenment philosophy from Descartes to Spinoza, and left a direct imprint on modern psychology. Albert Ellis, the founder of rational emotive behavior therapy, cited Epictetus as a primary influence. Aaron Beck, who developed cognitive behavioral therapy, acknowledged a similar debt. When a therapist asks you to separate an event from your interpretation of it, the intellectual ancestry runs straight back to the painted porch. More recently, Stoicism has found an audience well beyond academia. Military resilience programs draw on its principles. Peak performance coaches teach the dichotomy of control to athletes and executives. And a growing number of ordinary people, overwhelmed by algorithmic feeds, 24-hour news, and a culture that profits from their anxiety, are discovering that a 23-century-old philosophy speaks to their situation with uncomfortable precision. The reason is simple. The modern world is saturated with things we cannot control, and Stoicism was designed for exactly that problem. It teaches you to notice your reactions before acting on them, to invest your effort where it actually matters, and to build an inner steadiness that holds whether the day goes well or falls apart. The porch Zeno opened in Athens is still open. The invitation to walk through it has never been more timely. Principles of virtue, wisdom, and self-discipline. At the core of Stoicism lies a deceptively simple belief, yet one that is extraordinarily difficult to live by. The highest good in life is virtue. Not wealth, not comfort, not reputation, and certainly not the absence of pain. Virtue, arete, meaning excellence of character, is the only thing worth pursuing for its own sake. Everything else, health, wealth, social standing, are preferred indifference. They're nice to have, and it's reasonable to pursue them, but they do not define whether your life is a good one. Only the quality of your character can do that. The practical impact of this belief is profound. If virtue is the highest good, then no one can take your ability to live a meaningful life. A prison cell might confine your body, a market crash could drain your savings, or a diagnosis may rob you of your health. But these cannot strip you of your ability to respond with wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. This is the foundation of Stoicism, and it is why this philosophy has been embraced by people in the most extreme circumstances, enslaved, imprisoned, exiled, or dying, and has been found useful rather than hollow. One of Stoicism's core teachings is the distinction between things within our control and those that lie beyond it. Epictetus opens his Enchiridion with this line and returns to it often. Your judgments, intentions, and efforts, these belong to you. But other people's behavior, the outcomes of your projects, and the opinions the world forms about you. They do not. The Stoics call on us to take this distinction seriously. It's not an abstract idea, but a filter for every moment of frustration or anger. When something bothers you, ask, is any part of this within my control? If it is, act. If not, acknowledge the feeling and direct your energy toward what you can influence. Under real pressure, whether it's a layoff, a broken relationship, or a public failure, this discipline becomes something closer to liberation. You stop waging war against reality and start working with the only material you truly control, your own response. Stoicism places immense weight on self-discipline, and for good reason. Understanding the right thing to do is useless if you can't make yourself do it. Temperance, the virtue of self-control, runs like a structural beam through the tradition. Seneca wrote at length about the dangers of anger, not because anger is inherently shameful, but because it hijacks your ability to act from principle. Epictetus returned to the theme of mastering impulse, saying that a person who cannot resist a second helping, a sharp retort, or an unnecessary purchase is no freer than someone in chains. The Stoic approach to discipline is incremental. You train with small refusals, skipping a comfort, tolerating a minor inconvenience, holding your tongue when a clever insult is ready on your lips, so that when a genuine test arrives, the muscle is already strong. Marcus Aurelius, who had access to every luxury the ancient world could provide, reminded himself each morning that he did not need any of it. The practice wasn't punitive. It was preventive, a way of ensuring that comfort never quietly became dependency. None of this works without self-awareness. The Stoics were, above all, keen observers of their own minds. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is an extended exercise in exactly that, noticing his own impatience, vanity, and fear, and gently steering himself back toward the person he wanted to be. Seneca's nightly review, asking what he had done well, where he had stumbled, and what he would correct tomorrow, was not self-punishment. It was maintenance, like the pre-flight check a pilot performs. The tradition also developed a technique for sharpening awareness, negative visualization, which the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. Each morning, briefly imagine the difficulties the day might bring. Rudeness from a colleague, a plan falling through, bad news arriving unexpectedly. The purpose is not to cultivate dread, but to strip the shock from things going wrong. By rehearsing difficulty in advance, you meet it with steadiness rather than panic. Together, these practices form a single coherent system. Self-awareness shows where discipline is needed. Discipline makes virtuous action possible, and virtue gives all that effort a purpose. The system asks much of you, but it delivers something that 23 centuries of testing have shown to be remarkably durable. A life you can respect, even when nothing else seems to go right. The origin of Stoicism and its key figures. Stoicism began in Athens around 300 BC, its roots planted in a disaster. Zeno of Citium, a merchant from Cyprus, lost his entire shipment of Phoenician purple dye in a shipwreck. Stripped of his fortune and direction, he wandered into an Athenian bookshop. The owner happened to be reading aloud from an account of Socrates, and something about the story so captivated Zeno that it would forever change the course of his life. Zeno asked where he could find people who lived according to Socrates' philosophy. The bookseller pointed to a philosopher named Crates of Thebes, a cynic, who was passing by. Zeno followed him, eventually studying under him and later under teachers from the Megarian school and Plato's academy. He absorbed and reworked their teachings until he created something distinctly his own. When he began teaching, Zeno chose a public colonnade in the Athenian marketplace, the Stoa Poikile, or painted porch. His followers came to be known as men of the Stoa, and eventually simply Stoics. The name Stoic is worth reflecting on. Unlike schools named after their founders, such as Platonists or Aristotelians, the Stoics derived their name from a place, a public one at that. The philosophy was born in the open air, accessible to anyone passing through the marketplace. From the outset, this carried the implication that wisdom wasn't a private luxury, but something available to anyone willing to think carefully about how to live. Stoicism, at its core, is a Socratic philosophy. Socrates never wrote a word. His teachings are preserved through the accounts of his students, such as Plato, but his influence on Zeno was profound. Two central Socratic convictions are woven through the very fabric of Stoic thought. First, Stoicism teaches that virtue, not wealth, pleasure, or reputation, is the highest good. Socrates famously argued that it is better to suffer injustice than to commit it, and that a person who understands what is truly good will naturally act in a virtuous way. Zeno absorbed this fully, and the Stoic belief that virtue alone is sufficient for a flourishing life is deeply Socratic. Second, Stoics uphold the practical nature of philosophy. Socrates didn't lecture from a podium. He questioned people in the streets, at dinner parties, and in gymnasiums. He wanted philosophy to change the way you lived every day, not just to be admired from a distance. Zeno inherited this urgency, and Stoicism was never meant to be a theoretical system. It was designed to be lived. By the time Christianity was emerging in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, Stoic ideas had already circulated through the Mediterranean world for nearly 4 centuries. The overlap between these two traditions is striking. The Stoic concept of logos, the rational principle that governs the cosmos, echoes in the opening of the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word. Stoic principles of moral duty, brotherhood, enduring suffering with dignity, and examining one's conscience each evening found a natural home in early Christian ethics. Many scientists believe the Apostle Paul, educated in Tarsus, a city steeped in Stoic philosophy, used language and concepts that scholars have traced directly to the Stoic tradition. Early church fathers, including Clement of Alexandria and Augustine, engaged deeply with Stoic texts, sometimes adopting their ideas, sometimes adapting them to fit a theological framework. The relationship between Stoicism and early Christianity was a genuine conversation, and as a result, Stoic ideas are woven deeply into Western moral thinking, even in places where the name Stoicism is never mentioned. What began on the painted porch in Athens travelled further than Zeno could have ever imagined. Through Rome, into the churches, across the centuries, and into a world that still reaches for these ideas whenever it seeks a steady place to stand. Stoicism was born in Athens, but it was Rome that made it famous. For the first century and a half, Stoicism remained primarily a Greek academic pursuit. That changed in the 2nd century BC, when Roman diplomats and generals travelling east began absorbing Greek thought and bringing it back to Rome. Panaetius of Rhodes, a Stoic who befriended the powerful general Scipio Aemilianus, became the first true ambassador of Stoicism to Rome. He reframed Stoic ethics in terms the Roman elite already understood: duty, civic responsibility, and endurance, and by the 1st century BC, Stoicism had quietly become the unofficial philosophy of Rome's ruling class. The fit was natural. Roman culture prized discipline, public service, and composure under pressure, all values Stoicism directly addressed. The philosophy spread quickly through the educated classes: lawyers, statesmen, military officers, and, eventually, emperors. Stoicism's greatest flowering came during the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, producing 3 key writers whose works define the tradition for modern readers. Seneca, essayist, playwright, and advisor to Emperor Nero, wrote on grief, anger, and the shortness of life with a vividness that makes his letters feel startlingly contemporary. Epictetus, born into slavery and freed in adulthood, taught in a small school in Nicopolis, hammering relentlessly on a single point. Freedom begins with understanding what is and is not within your power. His discourses and the concise Enchiridion remain the clearest practical manual Stoicism has ever produced. Then there's Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome from 161 to 180 AD. He governed a vast empire through plague, frontier wars, and internal revolt, and did so while keeping a private journal of Stoic reflections that was never meant for publication. Meditations draws its power from this privacy. Here is the most powerful man in the ancient world, night after night, reminding himself that his control over external events is an illusion, and that the only territory he truly governs is his own mind. The book has never gone out of print. Rome did more than adopt Stoicism. It reshaped the philosophy's focus. The early Greek Stoics had devoted considerable energy to logic and physics, theories about language, knowledge, and the structure of the cosmos. The Roman Stoics, practical by nature, shifted the emphasis to ethics: how to live, how to lead, and how to face suffering and death. Almost everything that survives in the popular Stoic canon today, the meditations, the letters, the handbook, belongs to this Roman ethical tradition. It is this version of Stoicism that people turn to when they need something that works on a difficult afternoon. When the Western Roman Empire fell in the 5th century, Stoic texts passed into the hands of Christian scholars who recognized a shared concern with virtue and inner discipline. The ideas resurfaced in Renaissance humanism, in the moral philosophy of Spinoza and Kant, and in the 20th century when psychologists building cognitive behavioral therapy acknowledged a direct debt to Epictetus. Today, the philosophy enjoys a popular revival. Books, podcasts, online communities, corporate workshops, all drawing on ideas first tested in Roman courtrooms and military camps nearly 2,000 years ago. Rome gave Stoicism its most enduring voice. The empire is gone. The philosophy it nurtured is not. Modern followers of Stoicism among famous people. There's a particular kind of pressure that comes with living in public. Every decision you make is under a microscope. Every misstep is magnified. Suddenly, your every move becomes a spectacle, and the distance between who you truly are and the story the world tells about you grows wider with every passing moment. And there's no escaping it, whether in a boardroom, on a film set, or in the corridors of political power. It's in these very conditions that a growing number of prominent figures have turned, sometimes quietly, sometimes openly, to an ancient philosophy for steadiness. What they've found in Stoicism is not just a passing trend or self-help formula, but a set of tools designed for exactly the kind of life they lead. High stakes, high visibility, and full of things they cannot control. Among those who've openly embraced modern Stoicism, Arnold Schwarzenegger stands out as one of the most vocal. The bodybuilder, actor, and former governor of California has frequently spoken about his admiration for Marcus Aurelius. In his 2020 commencement address to pandemic-era graduates, he quoted the emperor, specifically a line about obstacles becoming the path forward. It wasn't just a platitude for decoration. It reflected the operating principle of a career built on transforming apparent disadvantages into defining strengths: a foreign accent, an unpronounceable name, a body that casting directors once called too weird. In his book, Be Useful, Schwarzenegger credits meditations for shaping his thinking on duty, resilience, and the limits of fame. He appeared on the Daily Stoic podcast to discuss these ideas in depth, making it clear that his interest is far from casual. For Schwarzenegger, Stoicism is not merely an idea, it's a practical framework that he applies to real-life decisions. When journalist Gary Wills asked Bill Clinton in 1992 which book, other than the Bible, had most influenced him, the future president paused. He then answered, "The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius." It's an unexpected choice, especially for a politician known for his warmth and gregariousness. After all, Meditations is introspective, austere, and deeply concerned with the limits of power. But when you consider Clinton's experience under relentless public scrutiny, the connection starts to make sense. Clinton later confirmed to the Wall Street Journal that he rereads the book every few years. Whether or not Clinton would call himself a Stoic, his repeated return to meditation suggests something more than mere intellectual curiosity. The book offers exactly the kind of advice a president might need at 2 a.m. That opinions are not facts, that most of what we fear never materializes, and that the quality of your judgment matters more than the noise surrounding it. Not every public figure drawn to Stoicism has fully embraced the label. Elon Musk, for instance, has never identified as a Stoic. His philosophical influences are more closely tied to Aristotle's first principles, reasoning. Yet commentators regularly point to Stoic patterns in the way he operates: a remarkable tolerance for public failure, a willingness to absorb enormous risk, and a focus on long-term purpose rather than short-term approval. When SpaceX rockets exploded in their early years, Musk's response was not to retreat, but to iterate. Whether he arrived at that mindset through Stoic reading or through his own temperament, the resemblance to the Stoic discipline of distinguishing between what you can control and what you can't is hard to ignore. A similar pattern is visible in Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. While he hasn't positioned himself as a student of ancient philosophy, the principles he publicly advocates, focusing on effort rather than obsessing over outcomes, using discipline as an anchor, reframing hardship as privilege, echo Stoic teachings with striking clarity. His well-documented habit of rising before dawn to train, his emphasis on self-mastery, and his candid reflections on overcoming depression in his early 20s all reflect a mindset the Stoics would have recognized. Johnson's language is his own, but the underlying philosophy, focus on what you can control, endure what you must, and never let comfort become dependency, is as ancient as Stoicism itself. Much of Stoicism's modern visibility can be attributed to two figures who've done more than practice the philosophy. They've made it accessible to a mass audience. Ryan Holiday, a former marketing strategist turned writer, built an entire career on translating Stoic ideas into practical, actionable books. The Obstacle is the Way, Ego is the Enemy, and the Daily Stoic have collectively sold millions of copies and been adopted by professional sports teams, military units, and Silicon Valley executives. Holiday's Daily Stoic website and email newsletter reach hundreds of thousands of subscribers each day. He's interviewed figures like Schwarzenegger, General James Mattis, and dozens of others on how they apply Stoic principles under pressure. Tim Ferriss, the author and podcaster behind The Tim Ferriss Show, has been equally influential. Ferris has called Stoicism his safety net, the philosophical foundation that helps him take risks, absorb public criticism, and stay grounded under the pressure of his hyper-visible career. He regularly practices negative visualization, recommends Seneca's letters to his audience, and keeps a Marcus Aurelius quote taped to his refrigerator. Through Holiday and Ferris, Stoicism has reached tens of millions of people who might never have picked up a philosophy book, and many of them have gone on to explore the original sources. The common thread isn't celebrity or ambition, it's pressure. Those drawn to Stoicism in public life share a specific set of circumstances: relentless visibility, constant criticism, high-stakes decisions made under uncertainty, and a daily confrontation with things they cannot control. These are the conditions Stoicism was designed to address. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire through plague and war. Epictetus taught while carrying the scars of slavery. Seneca wrote his finest work under the threat of execution by Nero. The modern figures reaching for these texts, whether they're politicians, athletes, entrepreneurs, or entertainers, aren't doing so because Stoicism is fashionable. They're doing so because it works under pressure in ways few other frameworks can match. The philosophy asks nothing more than it always has. See clearly, act with integrity, control what you can, and let go of the rest. That instruction is 23 centuries old. The fact that a governor, a president, a CEO, and the highest paid actor in Hollywood have each found it useful suggests it will remain relevant for a long time to come. Virtue as the highest good. The Stoic virtues are justice, wisdom, self-discipline, and courage. The Stoics made a claim that still sounds radical today. Virtue is the only true good. While health is preferable to sickness, wealth to poverty, and a long life to a short one, none of these alone can make life truly good. Only the quality of your character can do that. The Greek word they used, arete, is closer to excellence than the narrower English idea of moral goodness. To live virtuously was to function at your highest capacity as a human being, to think clearly, act bravely, treat others fairly, and govern your desires with a steady hand. The Stoics didn't just leave excellence as an abstract idea, they broke it down into 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline. These weren't just ideals to be admired, they were practical tools meant to be applied to the messiness of real life, a disagreement with a friend, a setback at work, or a decision made under uncertainty. Each virtue shines a light on a different aspect of what it means to live well. For the Stoics, wisdom is the ability to see a situation as it actually is before your emotions distort it. You receive a critical email and your pulse rises. In that moment, wisdom is the voice that helps you focus on what the email actually says, rather than what you fear it implies. It's the discipline of distinguishing fact from interpretation, of recognizing which parts of a problem belong to you and which do not. Without wisdom, the other 3 virtues lack direction. Courage without wisdom becomes recklessness. Justice without wisdom turns into self-righteousness. Self-discipline without wisdom is mere rigidity. Wisdom provides the lens through which you determine what the moment calls for. The Stoics gave justice a scope far broader than the courtroom. Justice governed every interaction with another person, fairness in negotiation, honesty in conversation, generosity toward those with less, and the willingness to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Marcus Aurelius described human beings as limbs of a single body, each designed to serve the whole. A life spent extracting advantage from others might be successful by external measures, but the Stoics would not have called it good. A meaningful life, in their view, is one that contributes to a family, a neighborhood, a profession, a society. Stoic courage is not about fearlessness. The Stoics acknowledge that fear is natural. What matters is whether you let it control you. Courage means doing what you believe is right, even when the cost is real. Speaking an unpopular truth, leaving a secure position because it demands ethical compromise, or standing firm when someone more powerful pressures you to bend. Seneca, who ultimately faced execution by Nero, wrote extensively about preparing for adversity, not because he enjoyed suffering, but because a life without the willingness to endure hardship is a life governed by avoidance. Courage turns conviction into action. Without it, your values remain theoretical. The fourth virtue, temperance or self-discipline, addresses the gap between intention and execution. You may know perfectly well that losing your temper will damage a relationship, or that checking your phone at midnight will ruin your sleep. Knowledge alone doesn't stop you. Self-discipline does. The Stoics saw it as the virtue that makes the other three operational. You can value wisdom, justice, and courage all you like. But if you can't follow through when fatigue or provocation threatens to derail you, those values will collapse when you need them most. These four virtues aren't a menu from which you pick a favorite. They are interdependent. Wisdom tells you what the right course of action is. Justice ensures that action takes others into account. Courage gives you the strength to carry it out. Self-discipline keeps you on course when distraction or fear try to pull you toward easier paths. Remove anyone, and the system breaks down. Courageous but unjust action becomes tyranny. Wise but undisciplined intention becomes empty talk. This is what the Stoics meant when they called virtue the highest good. They weren't dismissing pleasure or comfort. They were pointing to the one thing that gives life its true meaning, the one thing that holds steady, whether the day goes well or falls apart. A life built on virtue is one you can look back on with honesty at the end of each day. By the Stoics' measure, that's as good as life gets. The dichotomy of control. Accepting the uncertainty of life. To be alive is to live in a state of constant uncertainty. We plan for tomorrow, but there's no guarantee it will unfold as we imagine. We commit to careers, relationships, and cities, unaware of the paths they might take. We rely on the stability beneath us, yet sometimes it gives way unexpectedly. A diagnosis, a phone call, a door that closes without warning. This isn't a flaw in the design of human existence. It is the design itself. Most of our suffering, the Stoics argued, comes from our refusal to accept this reality. We expect the world to be stable, predictable, and fair. When it proves otherwise, we are not merely disappointed. We are outraged, as if something promised has been taken away. But no such promise was ever made. Uncertainty isn't an interruption to normal life. It is normal life. The real challenge isn't eliminating uncertainty. It's learning how to live well with it. Think about how much of your life has been shaped by events you didn't plan for and couldn't predict. The job you got because someone else turned it down. The relationship that started with a random encounter. The crisis that forced you to develop a skill you never expected to need. If you trace the major turning points of your life, you'll likely find that most of them weren't the result of careful planning. They were the result of surprise. Surprise isn't a flaw in the system, it's a feature. The same unpredictability that brings setbacks also brings opportunities, and often you can't tell which one it is in the moment. The Stoics grasped this deeply. knowing that life would constantly surprise us and that how we respond mattered most. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that what seems like an obstacle could actually be the path forward, that the very thing blocking your progress can become the material for something better. But this reframing is only possible if you've already accepted that surprises will come, and not all of them will feel welcome. The modern mind tends to treat unpredictability as a problem to be solved. We invest enormous energy in forecasting, hedging, and scenario planning. These tools have their place, but they can also become a form of denial, a way of pretending that with enough data we can eliminate the unknown. We cannot. The future remains genuinely open, and no spreadsheet will close it. Learning to live with that openness is one of the central tasks of a mature human life. In the vocabulary of modern self-improvement, surrender is usually a dirty word. We are told to fight, to persist, to never give up. And there are contexts in which that advice is sound. When the obstacle is within your power to overcome, persistence is a virtue. But there are also contexts in which fighting is simply a refusal to see clearly. When the diagnosis is terminal, when the relationship is over, when the decision has been made by someone else and cannot be reversed, continued resistance is not courage. It is a failure to accept reality. The Stoics drew a sharp line between what they could influence and what they could not, and they practiced a deliberate release of the second category. This is not passivity, it is realism. Epictetus, who spent part of his life as a slave, knew better than most that there are circumstances you cannot change by willing them otherwise. What you can change is your response. The energy you waste raging against facts beyond your control is energy you could spend on actions that actually matter. There is a kind of courage in this release. It takes nerve to admit that you are not in charge, that your preferences do not govern the universe, that certain outcomes will occur regardless of how hard you work or how much you care. Humility of this kind is not weakness. It is a form of strength that most people never develop because they are too busy pretending they have more power than they do. The dichotomy of control is the cornerstone of Stoic ethics. Epictetus opens his Enchiridion with it. Some things are up to us and some things are not. Up to us are our judgments, our intentions, our desires, and our aversions. In short, everything that is genuinely our own doing. Not up to us are our bodies, our reputations, our positions, and everything else that depends on factors beyond our will. This division sounds simple, but applying it consistently is one of the hardest disciplines a person can undertake. We habitually blur the categories. We act as though our reputation is something we control, when in fact it is entirely in the hands of other people. We act as though our health is guaranteed, when in fact it can be taken from us overnight. We act as though our emotions are inflicted on us from outside, when in fact they arise from judgments we ourselves are making. The art of focusing on what you control begins with a relentless sorting process. Every time you feel frustrated, anxious, or angry, you pause and ask, what part of this situation is actually within my power? If there is something you can do, do it. If there is nothing you can do, acknowledge that fact and redirect your attention. The discipline is not about becoming passive. It is about becoming precise, investing your finite energy only where it can make a difference. None of this is possible without awareness. The Stoics practiced a form of attention that overlaps significantly with what modern psychology calls mindfulness, the capacity to observe your own mental states without immediately acting on them. When an impression arrives, an insult, a piece of bad news, a temptation, there is a brief interval before your response. In that interval, you have a choice. You can react automatically, or you can examine the impression, decide whether it is accurate, and choose a response that aligns with your principles. Marcus Aurelius called this the discipline of assent. Before agreeing to the story your mind is telling you, pause and interrogate it. Is this situation really as catastrophic as it feels? Is this person really attacking me? Or am I interpreting their words through a filter of my own insecurity? Is this setback permanent, or is it a temporary obstacle that will look different in a week? The pause is where freedom lives. Without it, you are simply a machine running pre-installed programs. Mindfulness, in this sense, is not about relaxation or stress reduction, though those may be side effects. It is about inserting a wedge of awareness between stimulus and response so that you can choose rather than merely react. The Stoics did not have meditation apps, but they had the same insight that underlies them. If you cannot watch your own mind, you cannot govern it. The sorting process sounds straightforward in theory, but turns out to be surprisingly difficult in practice. Here are some guidelines that may help. First, notice where your language betrays you. If you find yourself saying things like, "They made me angry," or "The traffic ruined my morning," you are assigning causal power to things outside yourself. No one can make you angry. They can only do things, and you can choose how to interpret those things. Traffic cannot ruin your morning. It can only slow you down, and the ruination is a judgment you add. Paying attention to your own phrasing is one of the fastest ways to identify where you have blurred the categories. Second, separate effort from outcome. You control whether you prepare thoroughly for an interview. You do not control whether you get the job. You control whether you eat well and exercise. You do not control whether you develop a chronic illness. You control whether you treat your partner with kindness. You do not control whether they stay. Focusing on the effort rather than the outcome does not mean you stop caring about results. It means you stop letting results that are not yet determined and may never be hijack your present peace of mind. Third, ask the negative question. When you are unsure whether something is within your control, ask, "Can I guarantee this outcome through my own actions alone?" If the answer is no, if the outcome depends on luck, on other people, on circumstances beyond your reach, then it is not fully within your control. You may be able to influence it, but influence is not the same as control, and confusing the two is a recipe for frustration. The dichotomy of control is not an insight you can grasp once and then own forever. It is a skill, and like all skills, it requires practice. The following steps can help you develop it. Begin each day with a brief exercise in negative visualization. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Spend a few minutes imagining the difficulties the day might bring. A meeting that goes badly, a piece of criticism, a plan that falls through. The purpose is not to cultivate pessimism. It is to dissolve the shock of the unexpected. When you have already imagined difficulty, you are less likely to be thrown off balance when it arrives. Throughout the day, practice the pause. When you feel a strong emotional reaction, frustration, anger, anxiety, stop before you act. Ask yourself, what is actually happening here? What part of this is within my control? What is the most constructive response I can make? Even a few seconds of this kind of reflection can change the trajectory of your behavior. At the end of the day, review. Seneca recommended a nightly audit. What did I do well today? Where did I fall short? What could I do better tomorrow? The review is not self-punishment. It is maintenance. a way of keeping the instrument of your judgment in good working order. Over time, the patterns become visible. You notice which situations tend to blur your categories, which triggers reliably hijack your attention, and which responses serve you well. Finally, study the examples of others. Read the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, not as historical curiosities, but as coaches. Notice how they applied the dichotomy of control to their own lives, governing an empire, enduring slavery, facing execution. Their circumstances were extreme, but the principles they articulated are universal. If they could maintain clarity under those conditions, you can probably manage it in a traffic jam or a difficult conversation. The goal of all this practice is not to become invulnerable. The Stoics did not promise that you would stop feeling pain, loss, or disappointment. What they promised was that you would stop adding unnecessary suffering to the suffering that life inevitably brings. You would stop raging against facts you cannot change. You would stop poisoning your present with fears about a future you cannot control. You would stop mistaking your preferences for entitlements. Uncertainty does not disappear when you practice the dichotomy of control. It simply loses its power to destabilize you. You learn to stand inside it the way a sailor learns to stand on a moving deck, not by stopping the motion, but by adjusting your balance to accommodate it. The waves keep coming. You keep standing. And over time, what once felt like chaos begins to feel like home. Mastering emotions, a Stoic approach to managing emotions. Modern life has become, for most of us, an unbroken chain of reactions to external stimuli. The phone buzzes and we reach for it. A headline alarms us and our pulse rises. Someone cuts us off in traffic and irritation flares before we have time to think. We move through our days responding to emails, to notifications, to the moods of people around us, to circumstances we did not choose and often did not anticipate. By the time evening arrives, we are exhausted. Yet if asked what we actually decided during the day, we might struggle to answer. We reacted. We did not choose. The Stoics saw this pattern 2,000 years ago and diagnosed it with precision. They noticed that most human suffering does not come from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events, from the stories we tell ourselves the instant something happens. A colleague's sharp comment becomes evidence that we are disrespected. A delayed flight becomes proof that the universe is conspiring against us. A small setback becomes a catastrophe. The event is one thing. The emotional avalanche that follows is another. And the avalanche, the Stoics argued, is largely optional. The foundation of Stoic emotional management is a clear-eyed recognition of what lies within our power and what does not. We cannot control the economy, the weather, other people's opinions, or the 1,000 small accidents that shape each day. We cannot guarantee that our plans will succeed, that our relationships will last, or that our bodies will remain healthy. These things are subject to forces beyond our reach, and pretending otherwise is a recipe for frustration. What we can control is our response. We control the judgments we make about events, the interpretations we assign to other people's behavior, the stories we rehearse in our own heads. We control whether we pause before reacting, or whether we let impulse steer the ship. This territory, the inner territory of thought, interpretation, and choice, is small compared to the vastness of the external world, but it is ours, and it turns out to be enough. The Stoic insight is not that we should stop caring about external outcomes. It is that we should stop letting external outcomes determine our internal state. You can work hard for a promotion and still maintain your composure if you do not get it. You can love someone deeply and still retain your equilibrium if they leave. The decoupling of inner peace from outer circumstance is not coldness or indifference. It is freedom. Staying calm when things go wrong is not a personality trait you either have or lack. It is a skill, and like any skill, it can be developed through practice. The Stoics approached it systematically. They trained themselves to expect difficulty, to rehearse adversity in advance, and to treat setbacks as opportunities to exercise virtue rather than as injustices to be resented. Marcus Aurelius began each morning by reminding himself that he would encounter difficult people during the day, the ungrateful, the arrogant, the dishonest. By anticipating these encounters, he robbed them of their power to surprise him. When the difficult person actually appeared, Marcus was not caught off guard. He had already decided how he wanted to respond. This technique, sometimes called negative visualization or premeditatio malorum, is one of the most practical tools the Stoics left us. It does not make problems disappear, it makes them manageable. Calm under pressure is also a matter of perspective. When you are caught in an emotional storm, the crisis feels all-encompassing. The Stoics recommended a deliberate shift of viewpoint. Zoom out. Consider the event in the context of your whole life. Consider your life in the context of human history. Consider human history in the context of the cosmos. From that vantage point, most of what troubles us shrinks to its actual size. This is not denial. It is proportion. The Stoics did not aim for the elimination of emotion. They aimed for the cultivation of appropriate emotion, responses that fit the situation rather than responses that distort it. Grief at the loss of someone you love is appropriate. Rage at being stuck in traffic is not. Joy at a meaningful accomplishment is appropriate. Anxiety over a scenario that exists only in your imagination is not. The goal is balance, feeling what the moment genuinely calls for, neither more nor less. This balance requires a kind of ongoing calibration. You have to pay attention to your own emotional patterns, notice where you habitually overreact, and gently correct course. Seneca compared the process to steering a ship. You cannot control the wind, but you can adjust the sails. You cannot prevent emotions from arising, but you can notice them early and choose whether to amplify them or let them pass. Over time, the adjustment becomes more natural. The ship stops lurching from side to side and begins to hold a steadier course. A balanced approach also means recognizing that discomfort is not always a signal to flee. Modern culture tends to treat any negative feeling as a problem to be solved immediately, with distraction, with consumption, with medication. The Stoics took a different view. They saw certain kinds of discomfort as useful information, even as opportunities for growth. Sitting with difficulty, rather than rushing to escape it, can teach you things that comfort never will. There is a practical payoff to emotional mastery that goes beyond inner peace. A calm and focused mind makes better decisions. When you are flooded with anger, fear, or anxiety, your cognitive resources are hijacked. You see fewer options. You process information more narrowly. You are more likely to act impulsively and regret it later. The ancient Stoics understood this intuitively. Modern neuroscience has confirmed it in detail. Consider the difference between two versions of yourself. One making a decision in the grip of panic, the other making the same decision after a few minutes of deliberate breathing and reflection. The external situation is identical. The internal state, and therefore the quality of the decision, is radically different. Emotional regulation is not a luxury for people with easy lives. It is a competitive advantage in a world that rewards clear thinking and punishes reactive mistakes. This does not mean suppressing your emotions or pretending they do not exist. It means creating enough space between stimulus and response that you can engage your full intelligence. The emotion still arises. You simply do not let it make the decision for you. The Stoics developed a repertoire of techniques for working with emotions. These are not one-time fixes. They are practices, disciplines you return to again and again until they become second nature. The first technique is the pause. When you feel a strong emotion rising, stop. Do not speak. Do not act. Take a breath. In that pause, you create a tiny gap between the event and your response, a gap in which choice becomes possible. Epictetus called this withholding assent. The impression has arrived. You do not have to agree with it immediately. You can examine it first. The second technique is reframing. Once you have paused, ask yourself, is there another way to interpret this situation? The colleague who snapped at you may be exhausted, not hostile. The project that failed may have taught you something you could not have learned any other way. The traffic jam may be an opportunity to listen to something you have been meaning to hear. Reframing does not change the facts. It changes the story you tell about the facts, and the story is where most of your suffering lives. The third technique is the view from above. When an event feels overwhelming, zoom out. Imagine looking down at yourself from a great height, from across the city, from orbit, from deep space. The problem does not disappear, but it assumes its proper scale. You are one person among billions, dealing with one difficulty among countless difficulties that have come and gone across the centuries. This is not meant to minimize your experience. It is meant to liberate you from the illusion that your current crisis is the center of the universe. The fourth technique is journaling. The Stoics were prolific writers, and not by accident. Writing forces you to articulate what you are feeling, which often reveals that the feeling is less coherent than it seemed. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations as a form of self-therapy, reminders to himself about how he wanted to think and act. Seneca reviewed his day each evening in writing, noting where he had fallen short and what he would do differently. The practice externalizes your mental chatter and makes it available for examination. Morning preparation. Before you check your phone or open your email, spend 2 minutes imagining the difficulties the day might bring. A meeting that goes badly, a piece of criticism, a plan that falls through. By rehearsing these possibilities in advance, you reduce their power to knock you off balance when they arrive. The 10-second rule. When you feel a strong negative emotion, commit to waiting 10 seconds before you respond. Use those seconds to breathe slowly and ask yourself what response would serve you best. 10 seconds is not long, but it is often enough to break the grip of impulse. The evening review. At the end of each day, spend 5 minutes reflecting. What triggered strong emotions today? How did I respond? What would I do differently? Seneca called this practice calling the soul to account. Over time, patterns emerge. You begin to see which situations reliably hijack your composure and can prepare for them in advance. Voluntary discomfort. Once a week, deliberately expose yourself to a mild hardship, a cold shower, a skipped meal, a day without your phone. The purpose is not punishment. It is inoculation. By practicing discomfort on your own terms, you build the capacity to handle discomfort that arrives uninvited. The dichotomy check. Whenever you feel frustrated or anxious, run the situation through a simple filter. What part of this is within my control? Focus your energy there. Release the rest. This is the Stoic dichotomy of control in its most practical form, and it can be applied dozens of times a day. Resilience is not a trait you are born with. It is a capacity you build through repeated encounters with difficulty and repeated practice of recovery. Every time you face a setback, pause, reframe, and choose a constructive response. You are strengthening the neural pathways that make such responses easier in the future. Every time you let impulse run the show, you are strengthening the opposite pathways. The choice compounds over time. The Stoics understood this deeply. They did not expect to become sages overnight. They expected to practice, to fail, to practice again. Epictetus compared the process to training for an athletic contest. You do not become strong by thinking about strength. You become strong by lifting weights, day after day, even when you do not feel like it. Emotional resilience works the same way. The exercises are simple. The difficulty is doing them consistently. What you are building over months and years of practice is a kind of inner stability that does not depend on external conditions. The world will continue to deliver surprises, some welcome, some not. Your circumstances will change in ways you cannot predict. But if you have trained your responses, if you have practiced the pause and the reframe and the view from above, you will meet those changes from a steady center. The storms will still come. You will have learned to stand. The role of self-discipline, cultivating self-discipline to respond rationally to situations. The alarm sounds and we hit snooze. A difficult email arrives and we postpone responding indefinitely. The dessert sits in the refrigerator and we find ourselves standing in front of it at midnight, spoon in hand. We move through our days yielding to the path of least resistance, giving in to small impulses that seem harmless in isolation, but accumulate into patterns we never chose. By the time we notice, the pattern has become a habit, and the habit has become who we are. The ability to respond adequately to various situations is a critically important life skill, perhaps the most important one. You can be intelligent, talented, and well-intentioned, but if you cannot govern your own reactions, those qualities will be undermined at every turn. The brilliant employee who loses her temper in meetings will not be promoted. The gifted athlete who cannot maintain discipline in training will not reach his potential. The loving partner who reacts defensively to every piece of feedback will slowly erode the relationship. What separates people who navigate life well from those who stumble through it is often not ability or luck, but something simpler and more foundational: self-discipline. Self-discipline is the capacity to do what you have decided to do, even when you do not feel like doing it. It is the ability to pause before reacting, to choose a response rather than simply emit one, to act from principle rather than impulse. The Stoics placed it at the center of their ethical system because they understood that without it, none of the other virtues could be reliably exercised. You may value honesty, but without self-discipline, you will lie when lying is convenient. You may value courage, but without self-discipline, you will retreat when retreating is easier. Self-discipline is the mechanism that converts values into action. We live in an environment that is hostile to self-discipline in ways previous generations never faced. Every app on your phone has been engineered to capture your attention and hold it. Every advertisement is designed to create desire where none existed. Every newsfeed is optimized for emotional engagement, which usually means anger or fear. The modern world is a relentless machine for triggering reactions, and if you have not trained yourself to pause before responding, you will spend your life being pulled from one stimulus to the next, never quite in control of your own attention or behavior. The Stoics faced different challenges, but the underlying problem was the same. Seneca, one of the wealthiest men in Rome, wrote extensively about the dangers of luxury and distraction. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, reminded himself daily that his authority over external events was limited and that the real battle was internal. Epictetus, who had been a slave, taught that freedom begins not with external circumstances, but with mastery of one's own mind. Across vastly different life situations, they arrived at the same conclusion. The person who cannot control themselves will be controlled by everything else. This is not a call to become rigid or joyless. Self-discipline is not about suppressing your humanity. It is about directing it, channeling your energy toward what actually matters rather than scattering it across whatever happens to be in front of you. A disciplined person is not someone who never feels impulses. It is someone who has trained themselves to notice impulses before acting on them and to choose which ones deserve expression. Self-discipline is not a fixed trait. It is a capacity that can be strengthened through practice, much like a muscle. The research on willpower and self-regulation confirms what the Stoics intuited. Every act of self-control draws on a limited resource, but that resource can be expanded over time. The more you practice choosing your response rather than reacting automatically, the easier such choices become. The development of self-discipline begins with awareness. You cannot change a pattern you do not notice. This is why the Stoics placed such emphasis on self-observation, on watching your own mind at work. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations as a form of ongoing self-examination, noting where he fell short and reminding himself of the principles he wanted to embody. Seneca conducted a nightly review, asking himself what he had done well, where he had stumbled, and what he would do differently tomorrow. These practices create a feedback loop. You notice your reactions, you evaluate them, and over time you begin to catch yourself earlier in the process, before the reaction has fully formed. The second stage is practice under low-stakes conditions. You do not develop self-discipline by waiting for a crisis and then trying to summon it. You develop it through small, repeated acts of restraint in ordinary moments. Choosing not to check your phone during a conversation. Choosing to finish a task before moving to the next one. Choosing to hold your tongue when a clever retort is ready. These small choices may seem trivial, but they are training. They build the neural pathways that will be available when the stakes are higher. The third stage is deliberate exposure to discomfort. The Stoics practiced voluntary hardship, cold baths, simple food, sleeping on hard surfaces, not because they enjoyed suffering, but because they wanted to inoculate themselves against it. When you have chosen discomfort on your own terms, discomfort that arrives uninvited loses some of its power. You have already proven to yourself that you can endure it. This is the logic behind practices like fasting, cold showers, or simply sitting with an unpleasant emotion rather than reaching for a distraction. The pause. When you feel a strong impulse to speak, to act, to reach for your phone, stop. Take one breath. In that single breath, you create a gap between stimulus and response, and in that gap, you have a choice. The pause does not need to be long. Even a few seconds can be enough to shift from reaction to reflection. Implementation intentions. Research shows that people are far more likely to follow through on a behavior if they have specified in advance when, where, and how they will do it. Instead of saying, "I will exercise more," say, "I will go for a run at 7 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, starting from my front door." The specificity removes the need for in-the-moment decision-making, which is where self-discipline often fails. Environment design. Self-discipline is easier when your environment supports it. If you want to eat better, do not keep junk food in the house. If you want to focus on deep work, turn off notifications and put your phone in another room. Every choice you can eliminate through environmental design is a choice you do not have to make through willpower. Start small. The most common mistake in building self-discipline is trying to change too much at once. Begin with one small commitment and keep it consistently for 2 weeks before adding another. The accumulation of small wins builds confidence and momentum. Trying to overhaul your entire life in a single week builds only exhaustion and failure. Consider a scenario that plays out in workplaces everywhere. You are in a meeting, and a colleague publicly criticizes a project you have been leading. The criticism is delivered bluntly, perhaps even unfairly. You feel heat rising in your chest. Your mind races with counter-arguments, with evidence of your colleague's own failures, with sharp replies that would expose their hypocrisy. Without self-discipline, you react, you interrupt, you defend yourself with an edge in your voice. The meeting derails into a conflict that leaves everyone uncomfortable. Later, you may win the argument on points, but you have damaged a relationship, created an adversary, and signaled to the room that you cannot handle criticism gracefully. The short-term satisfaction of the retort is overwhelmed by the long-term cost. With self-discipline, the sequence unfolds differently. You feel the same heat, the same rush of counter-arguments, but you have trained yourself to notice that feeling and to pause before acting on it. You take a breath. You remind yourself that your goal is not to win this moment, but to advance the project and maintain working relationships. You respond calmly, acknowledging the concern, asking clarifying questions, promising to consider the feedback. The meeting continues productively. Later, in private, you may address the tone of the criticism, but from a position of strength, not defensiveness. The difference between these two scenarios is not personality, it is practice. The person in the second scenario has trained themselves through hundreds of smaller moments to pause before reacting. When the high-stakes moment arrived, the training was available. Self-discipline is not only useful for navigating external challenges, it is also the foundation of inner peace. When you are at the mercy of your own impulses, your internal state is constantly turbulent, buffeted by desires, fears, and reactions that arise without permission and drag you wherever they please. When you have developed the capacity to observe those impulses without immediately acting on them, something shifts. You discover that there is a part of you that is not the impulse, a part that can watch, evaluate, and choose. That witnessing presence is the beginning of stability. The Stoics called this state apatheia, often mistranslated as apathy, but actually meaning freedom from destructive passions. It is not numbness or indifference. It is a kind of equilibrium that allows you to engage fully with life without being capsized by it. You still feel. You simply do not let every feeling dictate your behavior. This inner stability has practical consequences. When you are not constantly reacting, you have more energy available for what matters. When you are not churning through anxiety about the future or regret about the past, you are more present to the moment in front of you. When you are not defending your ego at every turn, you are more open to learning. The cultivation of inner peace is not a retreat from the world. It is a way of engaging with the world more effectively. If you want to develop inner peace alongside self-discipline, here are some practical steps to get started. Begin with the body. Inner peace is not purely mental. It is supported by physical practices, adequate sleep, regular movement, nourishing food, time in nature. When the body is neglected, the mind struggles to find equilibrium. Treat your physical health as the foundation on which psychological stability is built. Establish a daily reflection practice. Even 5 minutes of morning stillness, before the phone, before the email, before the demands of the day, can change the texture of the hours that follow. Use this time to set an intention, to remind yourself of what matters, to prepare mentally for the challenges ahead. Practice the dichotomy of control. When you notice anxiety or frustration arising, ask yourself, what part of this situation is within my control? Focus your energy there. Release what is not. This single question, applied consistently, can transform your relationship with difficulty. Seek discomfort deliberately. Growth happens at the edge of your comfort zone. Choose small challenges that stretch you. A difficult conversation, a cold shower, a day of silence. Each time you prove to yourself that you can handle discomfort, your capacity expands. Find a community or a guide. The path is easier when you are not walking it alone. Whether through books, podcasts, a meditation group, or a single trusted friend, find sources of support and accountability. Self-discipline is not built in a day. It is built in 1,000 days, through choices so small that no single one of them seems to matter. The morning you get up when you said you would, the evening you put the phone away and read instead, the conversation where you listened instead of interrupting, the moment of frustration where you paused instead of reacting. None of these choices, taken alone, will transform your life, but taken together, over months and years, they create a different person, someone who can be trusted to show up, to follow through, to remain steady when others are losing their composure. The Stoics understood that character is destiny. What you repeatedly do becomes who you are, and who you are determines what your life will be. Self-discipline is the lever that allows you to shape your own character deliberately, rather than leaving it to chance or circumstance. It is not the only thing that matters, but it is the thing that makes the other things possible. The practice of gratitude. The importance of practicing gratitude in Stoicism. Gratitude occupies a curious position in Stoic philosophy. The Stoics are often remembered for their emphasis on endurance, discipline, and the acceptance of hardship, themes that can make the tradition sound grim. But running alongside these sterner notes is a quieter teaching about appreciation, about pausing to recognize what is already present rather than fixating on what is absent. For the Stoics, gratitude was not a soft sentiment. It was a form of clear seeing, a corrective to the distortions that desire and anxiety impose on our perception of reality. Gratitude is closely related to the recognition of virtue because it requires the same fundamental skill, the ability to evaluate things accurately. Just as wisdom involves seeing a situation as it actually is, gratitude involves seeing your life as it actually is, not as a collection of deficiencies waiting to be filled, but as a field of existing goods that merit acknowledgement. The ungrateful person is not merely unpleasant company. They are, in the Stoic view, making an error of judgment. They are failing to see what is in front of them. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius that the person who thinks they have too little will never have enough, no matter how much they acquire. The problem lies in the lens through which circumstances are viewed, and gratitude adjusts that lens. It does not change what you have. It changes your relationship to what you have. And that change, the Stoics argued, is where tranquility lives. The Stoic dichotomy of control, the distinction between what is up to us and what is not, provides a natural framework for gratitude. Most of the good things in your life were not entirely your doing. The country you were born in, the family that raised you, the body you inhabit, the opportunities that appeared at crucial moments, these were shaped by forces beyond your control. To take full credit for them would be a form of blindness. Gratitude is the appropriate response to goods that have arrived through no guarantee. This perspective is humbling, but it is also freeing. If you did not earn everything you have, you do not need to defend it with the anxiety of someone who fears losing what they built alone. You can hold your blessings more lightly, appreciating them while they last, without clutching at them in desperation. The Stoics saw this lightness of grip as essential to peace of mind. Epictetus, who spent part of his life as a slave before becoming one of the most influential teachers in Rome, had every reason to focus on what he lacked. Instead, he taught his students to begin each day by reminding themselves that everything they value is on loan. Your health, your relationships, your possessions, none of them are permanent. This sounds morbid, but the effect is paradoxically life-giving. When you stop assuming that good things are owed to you, their presence becomes a gift rather than an entitlement. Gratitude flows naturally from that recognition. Modern psychology has identified a phenomenon the Stoics would have recognized immediately: hedonic adaptation. This is the well-documented tendency for people to return to a baseline level of happiness regardless of changes in their circumstances. You get the promotion, the new house, the relationship you longed for, and within months, the thrill fades. What once seemed like it would change everything becomes the new normal, and your attention shifts to the next desire. Hedonic adaptation is a treadmill. You keep running, but you never arrive. The Stoics noticed that the pursuit of external goods, no matter how successful, did not reliably produce lasting satisfaction. Something else was needed. A way of stepping off the treadmill, of finding contentment that did not depend on the next acquisition. Gratitude is that something else. It interrupts the cycle of desire by redirecting attention from what you lack to what you already possess. When you deliberately pause to appreciate your health, your friendships, the roof over your head, the meal in front of you, you are counteracting the mind's tendency to take these things for granted. You are resetting the baseline, not by acquiring more, but by recognizing more. The abundance was always there. Gratitude is the practice of noticing it. This does not mean you should stop striving or setting goals. The Stoics were not quietists. They believed in effort, in duty, in working to improve yourself and your circumstances. But they also understood that striving without gratitude is a recipe for perpetual dissatisfaction. You can pursue better while appreciating good. The untrained mind has a strong bias toward the future. It spends its time anticipating, planning, worrying, and wanting. This forward orientation is useful for survival, but corrosive to contentment. Gratitude is a counterweight. It pulls attention back to the present, to what is already here, to the goods that require no further achievement to enjoy. Marcus Aurelius practiced this shift deliberately. In his private journal, he reminded himself to appreciate simple things: the beauty of bread as it bakes, the crack in an old piece of pottery, the faces of those he loved. These were ordinary features of daily life that became extraordinary when attended to with care. The practice was a discipline of perception, training himself to see richness where an ungrateful eye would see only routine. Practical steps for forming a gratitude mindset. Morning inventory. Before the day's demands take over, spend 2 minutes listing 3 things you are grateful for. They do not need to be profound. A good night's sleep, a friend who made you laugh yesterday, the coffee in your hands. Specificity matters more than grandeur. The Stoic Evening Review. Seneca recommended ending each day with reflection. Add a gratitude component. What went well today? What did I receive that I did not earn? Who contributed to my well-being without being asked? This practice bookends the day with appreciation. Gratitude letters. Once a month, write a short letter to someone who has made a positive difference in your life. You do not need to send it, though sending it amplifies the effect. The act of articulating your appreciation clarifies it in your own mind. Negative visualization. The Stoics practiced imagining the loss of things they valued, not to cultivate anxiety, but to refresh appreciation. Briefly consider what your life would be like without your health, your home, or a person you love. Then return to the present and notice how the imagined absence makes the actual presence more vivid. Gratitude triggers. Attach the practice to existing habits. Every time you drink your first cup of coffee, think of one thing you appreciate. The trigger ensures consistency, and consistency is what transforms a practice into a trait. Gratitude has a curious reflexive quality. When you practice it consistently, it changes not only how you feel, but how you are perceived, and how others feel in your presence. Grateful people are easier to be around. They complain less, appreciate more, and create an atmosphere in which others feel valued. When you notice the contributions others make to your life and acknowledge them, people feel seen. Relationships deepen. Generosity circulates. The Stoics called this sympatheia, the idea that all things are connected, that we are limbs of a single body. Gratitude is one of the ways this connection becomes tangible. When you appreciate what you have received, you become more inclined to give. The effect mirrors back and forth, creating a positive feedback loop. It may seem counterintuitive to speak of gratitude in the context of hardship, but the Stoics saw no contradiction. They practiced gratitude not only for pleasant things, but also for difficulties, because difficulties, rightly approached, are teachers. The setback that forced you to develop resilience, the failure that revealed a flaw you could then correct, the loss that clarified what truly mattered. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the obstacle is the way, that the very thing blocking your path can become the material from which you build your progress. Gratitude for obstacles is an advanced practice, not a beginner's exercise. But it follows logically from the Stoic framework. If virtue is the highest good, and if difficulty is the forge in which virtue is shaped, then difficulty deserves a kind of thanks, not enjoyment, not preference, but recognition that it too has contributed to who you are becoming. This does not mean pretending that pain is pleasant, or that loss does not hurt. It means holding two truths at once. This is hard, and this is making me stronger. Gratitude of this kind is not denial. It is integration, a way of finding meaning in experiences that would otherwise feel purely destructive. Gratitude, in the Stoic sense, is not a feeling that arrives spontaneously. It is a discipline that must be cultivated through deliberate practice. You do not wait until you feel grateful and then express it. You practice expressing it, and the feeling follows. The Stoics understood that the mind is trainable. The patterns of thought you reinforce become the patterns of thought you inhabit. If you spend your days focused on lack, lack is what you will perceive. If you train yourself to notice abundance, abundance is what you will find. Not because your circumstances have changed, but because your attention has. Gratitude is a choice you make again and again until the choice becomes a habit, and the habit becomes a way of seeing the world. Achieving peace of mind. Understanding the ultimate goal of Stoicism. Inner peace. A twinge in your chest sends your mind racing toward worst-case diagnoses. A friend doesn't return your call, and you construct elaborate theories of abandonment. Your child comes home quiet, and you spiral into anxiety about what might be wrong. We spend enormous portions of our lives reacting to events that haven't happened, suffering in anticipation of pain that may never arrive, and interpreting ambiguous signals in the darkest possible light. By evening, we are exhausted, not from what actually occurred, but from the stories we told ourselves about what might. Every philosophical tradition answers one question: how should I live? The Stoics answered with unusual clarity. Philosophy's purpose is not accumulating knowledge or winning arguments. It is achieving inner peace so stable that external circumstances cannot shake it. This peace required active cultivation, a deliberate harmony between your inner life and reality. The Stoics observed that most suffering is self-inflicted. We torment ourselves with fears about the future, regrets about the past, and judgments harsher than events warrant. We rage against things we cannot change. We crave things that, once obtained, leave us unsatisfied. This suffering stems from a fundamental misalignment. We are at war with the nature of things rather than in harmony with it. Inner peace is not the absence of difficulty. It is the capacity to remain calm when chaos erupts, to maintain clarity when others are confused, to act with integrity under pressure. This peace must be built through understanding and practice. Two Greek terms capture the Stoic goal: apatheia and ataraxia. Apatheia is often mistranslated as apathy. The Stoic meaning was different: freedom from destructive passions that hijack judgment and drive you to act against your values. Rage, paralyzing fear, consuming envy, obsessive craving. Apatheia is not eliminating all feeling, but cultivating emotions that are appropriate, proportionate, and under conscious direction. Ataraxia means tranquility, a mind not easily thrown off balance. Imagine a deep lake. Storms churn the surface, but the depths remain still. Events will happen, pleasant and painful, but the person who has cultivated ataraxia meets them from steadiness rather than reactivity. Together, these states describe psychological sovereignty, genuine freedom from internal compulsions and external pressures. Some things are within your power, your judgments, intentions, responses, and some are not. Other people's behavior, the economy, your reputation, the past. Most disturbance comes from confusing these categories. Before reacting, ask what is actually within your control. Focus there. Release the rest. The discipline of assent. Impressions constantly arrive, interpretations, judgments, narratives. You do not have to accept them automatically. Pause, examine them, decide whether they are accurate. This pause is where freedom lives. Negative visualization. Regularly imagine difficulties, loss, failure, illness, death. When you have contemplated the worst, it loses power to shock you. You have rehearsed your response and reminded yourself that hardship is part of the human condition, not a personal injustice. The view from above. When overwhelmed, zoom out. See yourself as one person among billions, living through one moment in vast time. Consider how today's crisis will look in a year, a decade, a century. This restores proportion without trivializing your experience. Journaling. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations as private self-correction. Seneca conducted evening reviews. These practices create feedback loops that accelerate growth. You cannot improve what you do not observe. Start with intention. Before the world floods in, set your orientation. What kind of person do you want to be today? Marcus Aurelius began each morning reminding himself he would encounter difficult people and that he would not be disturbed when they appeared. Apply the dichotomy in real time. When frustration arises, pause. What here is within my control? Direct energy there, release the rest. This practice, repeated hundreds of times, gradually rewires your automatic responses. Use obstacles as training. Every difficulty is an opportunity to practice virtue. Ask, what quality is this situation calling me to develop? What would the person I want to become do right now? Cultivate gratitude. Inner peace is undermined by constant wanting. Notice ordinary goods, health, shelter, relationships, and acknowledge them before they are gone. Accept impermanence. Everything is on loan. When you stop expecting permanence, you stop being devastated by change. You hold what you have more lightly, appreciating it while it lasts. The Stoics believed the universe is governed by a rational principle they called the logos, divine reason running through all things. Human beings share in this rationality. We are not separate from nature. We are expressions of it. From this came a powerful conclusion. To live well is to live according to nature. This means exercising your capacity for reason, aligning your will with reality rather than fighting against it. Inner peace is the natural result. When you stop demanding the universe conform to your preferences and start cooperating with its structure, conflict dissolves. This is not fatalism. The Stoics were active participants, soldiers, statesmen, teachers, but they acted from acceptance rather than resistance. They did what was in their power and accepted outcomes they could not control. This combination of effort and equanimity is the Stoic formula. Mental balance is not achieved once and possessed forever. It is continuous practice in ordinary moments. Recognize that perfect balance is not the goal. Even Marcus Aurelius reveals frustration in his journal. The goal is recovering quickly, noticing when you have been thrown off and returning to center. Use physical anchors. When reactive, take a slow breath. Feel your feet on the floor. These actions interrupt emotional escalation and create space for measured response. Remember, disturbances are temporary. The meeting will end. The criticism will fade. Borrowing future perspective diffuses present intensity. Keep good company. Surround yourself with those who model equanimity. Read the Stoics as ongoing conversations with wise friends. Inner peace is not a destination, but a way of walking, continuously aligning thoughts and actions with reason and nature. There is no final achievement after which effort becomes unnecessary. This may sound demanding, but the Stoics found it liberating. If peace depended on external circumstances, it would be forever out of reach. Because it depends on the quality of your mind, it is always available. You can begin right now with this thought, with this breath. The Stoics promised nothing easy. They promised something better, peace that is genuinely yours, that cannot be taken by misfortune, that grows stronger with practice. The path is open. The tools are ancient and tested. The only question is whether you will walk.
By the way, if you've listened up to this point, write the word listening in the comments. It's interesting to see how many of us are here.
Developing resilience in the face of difficulties. Obstacles as an opportunity for growth and character building. Problems are unavoidable. No amount of planning, wealth, or good fortune can construct a life without them. The business fails. The relationship ends. The diagnosis arrives. The person you trusted betrays you. These events are not anomalies in an otherwise smooth existence. They are the texture of existence itself. Difficulties will come. The only question worth asking is how you will meet them when they do. Most people experience problems as interruptions, unwelcome intrusions into the life they were trying to live. This framing is understandable but costly. When you treat every obstacle as an injustice, you add a layer of suffering on top of the difficulty itself. You are not only dealing with the problem, you are also dealing with your resentment that the problem exists at all. The Stoics saw this clearly. They noticed that much of what we call suffering is not caused by events, but by our judgment that events should be otherwise. Consider how problems actually affect us. In the short term, they disrupt our plans and consume our attention. They force us to respond, often under pressure, with incomplete information. They reveal the gap between how we imagine things would go and how they are actually going. This revelation can be painful, but it is also valuable. Problems expose our assumptions. They show us where our models of reality were incomplete or wrong. A life without problems would be a life without feedback, and a life without feedback cannot improve. In the longer term, problems shape character. The person you are today was formed largely by the difficulties you have faced and how you responded to them. The skills you developed because a situation demanded them. The patience you cultivated because impatience made things worse. The humility you learned when confidence proved unwarranted. Strip away the problems from your biography, and you strip away most of what made you who you are. The Stoics went further. They argued that problems are not merely tolerable but necessary, that virtue cannot exist without resistance. Courage is meaningless in the absence of fear. Patience is meaningless in the absence of frustration. Resilience is meaningless in the absence of hardship. The very qualities we most admire in human beings are forged in conditions we would never choose. This is the paradox at the heart of Stoic thinking about adversity. The obstacle is not blocking the path to growth. The obstacle is the path. This does not mean you should seek out suffering or pretend that pain is pleasant. It means recognizing that difficulties, rightly approached, are opportunities. Every problem is a chance to practice wisdom, to exercise self-discipline, to demonstrate integrity under pressure. Every setback is an invitation to become the kind of person who can handle setbacks. The raw material of character is not comfort. It is challenge. Problems will continue to arrive, unbidden and often unwelcome. What you make of them is up to you, living according to reason, decision-making based on rationality. Life is full of diverse situations, choices, and decisions. From the moment you wake until you sleep, you are navigating a continuous stream of options, some trivial, some consequential, many disguised as one when they are actually the other. What to say in a difficult conversation, whether to accept the job offer, how to respond when someone wrongs you, when to persist and when to let go. The quality of your life is, to a remarkable degree, the accumulated result of these decisions. Most people make decisions reactively. They follow impulse, habit, or the path of least resistance. They do what feels right in the moment without examining whether the feeling is trustworthy. The Stoics proposed a different approach, living according to reason. This means subjecting your choices to deliberate evaluation, asking not just what you want, but whether what you want is worth wanting, and whether the action you are about to take serves your deeper values or undermines them. Rational decision-making offers several advantages over its alternatives. First, it reduces regret. When you have thought carefully about a choice, you can stand behind it even if the outcome disappoints. You know you acted on the best information available with your principles intact. Second, it improves consistency. Emotions fluctuate. Reason provides a stable foundation that does not shift with your mood. Third, it builds trust, both self-trust and the trust of others. People learn that your decisions are not arbitrary, that you can be relied upon to act from principle rather than caprice. Imagine you receive a job offer that pays significantly more than your current position, but requires relocating away from family and friends. The reactive approach is to be swept up by the excitement of the salary or paralyzed by the fear of change. The rational approach is different. You pause. You clarify your values. What matters most to you at this stage of life? You gather information. What are the actual costs and benefits, both financial and personal? You consider the long term. How will you feel about this decision in 5 years? You consult trusted advisors. Only then do you choose. A rational approach includes several elements: pausing before acting, clarifying your objectives, gathering relevant information, considering alternatives, anticipating consequences, and aligning the decision with your values. It does not guarantee a perfect outcome. No method can. But it ensures that you are the author of your choices rather than their victim. Reason is the faculty that distinguishes human beings. To live according to reason is to live as fully human, awake, deliberate, and free. Recommendations for mastering Stoic principles in everyday practice. The Stoics lived in a world vastly different from ours. No smartphones, no social media, no 24-hour news cycle. Yet the challenges they faced were remarkably similar to our own. They dealt with uncertainty, loss, difficult people, the temptation to compromise their values, and the relentless pressure of circumstances beyond their control. The principles they developed were not abstract theories, but practical tools for navigating exactly the kind of turbulence that defines modern life. The question is not whether Stoicism is relevant today. The question is how to translate its teachings into habits that fit your actual circumstances. The inclusion of Stoic practice in modern life does not require dramatic gestures. You do not need to retreat to a monastery or abandon your career. Stoicism was designed for people engaged with the world: senators, soldiers, merchants, teachers. Its practices are meant to be woven into ordinary days, applied in meetings and conversations, tested in traffic jams and airport delays. The philosophy meets you where you are. Start with one principle, not all of them. The Stoic corpus is rich, and it is tempting to try to absorb everything at once. Resist this temptation. Choose a single idea, the dichotomy of control perhaps, or the discipline of the pause, and work with it for a month before adding another. Depth matters more than breadth. A principle you have internalized will serve you under pressure. A principle you have merely read will not. Anchor your practice to existing routines. The Stoics understood that consistency is built through structure. Attach your Stoic reflection to something you already do every day. Review your principles while drinking your morning coffee. Practice gratitude during your commute. Conduct your evening examination while brushing your teeth. The habit becomes automatic when it is linked to an existing trigger. Write things down. Marcus Aurelius kept a journal. Seneca wrote letters. Epictetus's teachings survive because his student Arrian recorded them. There is something about writing that clarifies thought and reinforces commitment. Keep a small notebook or a document on your phone. When you encounter a passage that strikes you, copy it. When you notice a pattern in your reactions, record it. When you handle a situation well, note what worked. This record becomes a mirror that shows you your own progress. Expect setbacks and treat them as data. You will lose your temper. You will make decisions you regret. You will forget everything you have learned in moments of stress. This is not failure. This is practice. The Stoics did not claim to be sages. They claimed to be students, working toward wisdom they had not yet achieved. When you stumble, do not add self-condemnation to the original mistake. Simply observe what happened, consider what you might do differently, and return to the path. Find companions on the journey. Philosophy is easier when it is shared. Seek out others who are interested in these ideas through books, podcasts, discussion groups, or individual friendships. The Stoics valued philosophical community. They taught, they debated, they challenged one another. You do not have to walk this path alone, and the walking is lighter when you have company. What the Stoics offer is not a promise that life will become easy. It will not. They offer something better, a way of meeting difficulty that does not diminish you, a framework for making decisions you can stand behind, a path toward a peace that external events cannot take away. The tools are ancient, but they work. The principles are simple, but they require practice. The invitation is open to anyone willing to begin. You have everything you need. The philosophy is in your hands. The only thing left is to live it. Not perfectly, not all at once, but day by day, choice by choice, returning again and again to the principles that point toward the person you want to become. Conclusion. And so we arrive at the end of this journey, though in truth, it is only the beginning of yours. 23 centuries ago, a merchant named Zeno lost everything he owned to the sea. What he found in an Athenian bookshop that day would echo through the ages, through the halls of Roman emperors, through the cells of imprisoned philosophers, through the private journals of those who faced plague and war and execution, and now, through these words, to you. The philosophy that began on a painted porch was never meant to stay there. It was meant to travel. It was meant to find people exactly like you. People navigating uncertainty, facing setbacks, wondering how to remain steady when the ground shifts beneath their feet. The Stoics built their philosophy for difficult days, and difficult days have a way of finding all of us. What you have heard in this audiobook is not a collection of abstract ideas. It is a toolkit, tested by time, refined by experience, and waiting to be used. The dichotomy of control, which teaches you where to invest your precious energy. The 4 cardinal virtues, which offer a compass for any difficult decision. The practice of gratitude, which reveals the abundance already present in your life. The discipline of the pause, which transforms reaction into choice. These are not theories to admire from a distance. They are practices to live by, starting today. You will not master them overnight. The Stoics themselves did not claim to be sages. They called themselves students, always practicing, always falling short, always returning to the work. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, filled his journal with reminders to himself about patience and humility. Seneca, for all his eloquence, admitted his own struggles with anger and fear. Epictetus taught wisdom while carrying the scars of slavery. They knew that philosophy is not about perfection, it is about direction. So here is what I want to leave you with. You have everything you need. The capacity for reason that allows you to pause before reacting. The ability to distinguish what you control from what you do not. The choice, available in every single moment, to respond with wisdom rather than impulse. The storms will come. They always do. But you can learn to stand. The porch is still open. The invitation stands. And the path forward begins with a single step. The next choice you make, the next breath you take, the next moment you meet with clarity instead of chaos. Thank you for listening. Now go live it.
Thank you for listening until the very end. If you enjoyed this audiobook, support the video with a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new releases.